Okay, so picture this. A world where just being hungry, I mean really hungry, could basically make you a criminal.
Yeah, it's hard to wrap your head around, isn't it?
We're talking 19th century Britain, and for thousands of women, uh, many of them just girls really, doing something desperate just to survive could lead to this awful punishment they called the crown of thieves.
That phrase, the crown of thieves,
Yeah.
it's so chilling, and it really gets to the heart of what we're diving into today. We're using Deborah J. Swiss's fantastic book, The Tin Ticket, to explore this, well, frankly astonishing and often brutal history of Australia's convict women.
Absolutely. And what's kind of staggering is how, systemic poverty combined with this pretty shocking social engineering idea in Britain led to thousands of women being exiled. Transportation, they called it, often for tiny, tiny offenses.
Exactly. But here's the amazing part. Against literally all odds, these women, these undesirables, became, foundational figures in a whole new nation, Australia.
So this isn't just a history lesson. We're looking at incredible human resilience, drawing on amazing primary sources, court records, ship logs, even journals. We get to see it through their eyes, sort of.
We do, and if there's one thing I hope you take away from this, it's the sheer courage and, honestly, the ingenuity these women showed. They faced unimaginable suffering.
Right. They weren't just victims.
Not at all. They were survivors. Nation builders, actually. This whole story might make you rethink what a founding figure even looks like. So should we start back in Britain? Set the scene.
Yeah, let's do that. So 19th century British Isles.
Yeah.
Paint us a picture. What was daily life like for ordinary working class people, especially women?
Oh, it was incredibly grim, particularly in the big industrial cities like Glasgow. You had the Industrial Revolution creating mass unemployment, paradoxically.
And government policies didn't help.
Quite the opposite. Parliament was selling grain overseas at inflated prices, which meant mass hunger and homelessness back home. The system itself was almost designed to keep people desperate.
And women got the worst of it, it sounds like. Fewer options, much lower pay.
Dramatically lower pay, even for backbreaking work. And the really striking thing, as you mentioned, is how poverty itself was viewed. It wasn't just misfortune. It was almost treated as a moral failing, a crime.
Punished more harshly than actual theft sometimes.
Often, yes. Think about the children. In Glasgow's slums like Gustav Street, the book paints such a vivid picture. Conditions were squalid, disease was everywhere. Dysentery, typhoid, cholera.
Just rampant.
Utterly. Half the children born there in 1820 didn't survive past age 5. It tells you something profound, doesn't it? Just existing was a risk for the poor.
Yeah. And people turned to desperate measures to cope.
They absolutely did. Things like laudanum, that cheap opium mix, were used constantly to drug children, basically, keep them quiet, suppress hunger. It led to widespread addiction.
And Godfrey's cordial.
Another opium concoction, yeah, to quiet babies. And gin was everywhere, often safer than the river water, sadly, but used to numb the pain for the whole family.
It sounds less like bad choices and more like no choices.
Exactly. It was a societal failure, pushing families to the absolute brink. Sometimes even forcing parents to, push their kids into petty crime just to get by. That desperation is key to understanding why so many ended up transported.
Which brings us right to Agnes McMillan.
Yeah.
Her story really captures this brutal reality. Tell us about her.
Agnes, born 1820, Gustav Street, abandoned by her parents when she was just 12, her first arrest. Right after Christmas, 1832. She was still only 12.
12 years old.
Her and her friend Janet Houston. They broke into a house to steal some lamb and clean clothes. Agnes even tried lying, gave a fake name, Agnes Ready. Ready being Scottish slang for telling a fib.
Resourceful even then. But the punishment for stealing food and clothes.
Incredibly harsh. 18 months in a woolen mill, Mr. Green's mill, 15-hour days, terrible ventilation, physical abuse. Just horrific.
There's that quote you mentioned earlier from the child laborer.
Right. Robert Blinko. His legs were permanently damaged by mill work. He famously said he'd prefer transportation over working in a factory. That tells you everything about how bad those mills were.
In Crown of Thieves.
That was the head-shaving punishment for girls who rebelled, a way to humiliate them, break their spirit, though it often seemed to backfire.
So Agnes gets out of the mill, but life doesn't get easier.
Not at all. Petty theft was still, frankly, a more reliable way to survive than the pittance she could earn, honestly. She gets caught again later in Kilmarnock, and you won't believe why.
Oh, what?
A tiny hosiery label left behind on something she stole.
No way.
Yes. That little mistake led to her sentence in May 1836. 7 years transportation. And her story, sadly, wasn't unique.
No, there were so many others, like a Ludlow Tedder. A very different situation, but ending in the same place.
Exactly. Ludlow was older, 45, a widow in London. 4 kids, including 9-year-old Arabella, struggling desperately after her husband died.
She worked as a maid.
Yes, earning far less than a man would. And she started pawning small items from her employer to make ends meet. It wasn't sustainable.
And her crime.
Pilfering 11 silver spoons and a bread basket from the barrister she worked for in December 1838.
So not exactly the crime of the century?
Hardly. But her trial at the Old Bailey, London's Central Criminal Court, it just showcased how corrupt the system was. Judges playing favorites, lawyers wanting bribes, the Lord Mayor having fancy dinners while trials were happening.
Just unbelievable.
Ludlow got 10 years transportation. But in a rare moment of something like compassion, she was allowed to take Arabella with her, which was unusual.
And from there, for many women like Agnes and Ludlow, the next stop was Newgate Prison.
Ah, Newgate, the prototype of hell, as it was called.
What made it so terrifying?
Well, the building itself was designed to inspire dread. Stone walls, windows facing inwards, no view of the outside world at all. Total sensory deprivation, almost.
And inside.
Horrific. Imagine 300 women and children, many half-naked, crammed into cells meant for far fewer. Filth, disease, constant drunkenness from the prison's own tap.
They sold alcohol inside the prison.
Oh, yes. And racks, lice, vermin everywhere. Just squalor.
But you said earlier, for some, even this was better than the streets.
Paradoxically, yes. A guaranteed, if meager, bit of bread and shelter sometimes made getting caught deliberately seem like a worthwhile gamble, which is just a terrible indictment of society.
Was anyone trying to change things? Or is it just accepted?
There were reformers. The most famous is Elizabeth Gurney Fry, a Quaker woman, incredibly determined. She started visiting Newgate back in 1813.
The Angel of Newgate.
That's her. She achieved remarkable things, got clothes distributed, insisted on female matrons instead of male guards who, frankly, treated the women's ward like a brothel. She lobbied Parliament relentlessly.
That took immense courage.
It did, but her work, being so public, had an unintended consequence. It sort of accidentally shone a light on the British Empire's dirty secret.
Which was?
That they were essentially planning to replace the labor lost from abolishing slavery with their own poor, their own undesirables, shipped off to the colonies. Fry's visits brought this uncomfortable truth out into the open.
Wow. That adds a whole other layer. And you see the class divide so clearly, like that story about Queen Charlotte viewing Fry's unappetizing waifs.
Absolutely. The indifference of the elite was staggering. Meanwhile, women like Agnes and Janet arrive at Newgate in May 1836. They get their tin cup, their rough sackcloth uniform.
But the Quakers provided dresses.
Yes, clean dresses, which must have felt like a luxury. But even in Newgate, life went on. There was a black market, gambling, women singing rude songs about the guards, even cross-dressing sometimes. A real spirit of defiance.
And Agnes. How did she cope?
Her record just says bad. But she held on to her identity. The book mentions her defiantly whispering, "My name is Agnes McMillan." A small act, but powerful, asserting herself against a system trying to erase her.
Incredible resilience. But leaving Newgate meant facing the voyage. Another horrific ordeal.
Oh, absolutely. First, chained up again, put onto stagecoaches for sometimes hundreds of miles to reach the port. Agnes and Janet had a 400-mile journey to London.
Then on to the ships. The Westmoreland for Agnes, the Hindostan for Ludlow. What happened then?
Processing. Physical exams, maybe a quick sponge bath described as a luxury, then down to the orlop deck, the lowest deck.
And the conditions there.
Appalling. Berths only 18 inches wide, packed in like tins of sardines, the book says. Seasickness was constant and debilitating.
Agnes suffered badly.
Yes. The records mention obstinate costiveness, severe constipation, and she refused the common treatment, calomel, which was mercury-based and dangerous. Smart woman, perhaps?
Probably. And once the ships were at sea?
All pretense of civility often vanished. The crew frequently saw the women as just cargo for their own use. Abuse was rampant. And pregnancy, disturbingly, it was almost encouraged, seen as a way to boost the population in the colony for the crown.
Just cynical exploitation. The mortality rate must have been high.
It was tragically high. The story of Elizabeth Booth dying and being buried at sea with sharks following the ship. It's a haunting image of the risks they faced. They even had strange rituals like the King Neptune ceremony crossing the equator. Trying to maintain some semblance of normalcy, maybe?
Amidst all that darkness. But you mentioned Ludlow Tedder had a slightly different experience on the Hindustan.
Yes, a small but crucial victory for her. Because she could read and write, she was appointed the ship's nurse.
That must have made a huge difference.
Immense. It meant relative safety for her and Arabella, extra food, access to medicine. It shows how even small advantages, like literacy, could literally be the difference between life and death on those voyages.
So they finally arrive. Hobart Town, Van Diemen's Land, now Tasmania. Agnes arrives December 3rd, 1836. A flag goes up. Women prisoners. What was that like?
A jarring contrast. The island itself is beautiful, stunning scenery, but Agnes's arrival was met with a hurricane, severe storms, in what was supposed to be summer.
A rough welcome.
And immediately, friends like Agnes and Janet were separated, torn apart right there on the docks. Most were sent straight to the female factory at Cascades.
The punishment factory.
Yeah.
What was it like?
Grim. It was actually a converted distillery built in a valley under Mount Wellington, so barely any sunlight. Damp, prone to flooding with raw sewage. Just unhealthy.
And run with military precision.
Absolutely. Superintendent Colonel George Arthur laid down strict rules. Cleanliness, quietness, regularity, submission, industry. All printed up ironically for women who mostly couldn't read.
And the chaplain, Holy Willie.
Reverend William Bedford, infamous. Deeply hypocritical, apparently sexually exploiting the women he was meant to be saving. The hypocrisy was just blatant.
What kind of work did they do?
Grueling stuff. Laundry, scrubbing floors, chopping wood, sewing, always segregated by class, even for church services. And punishments were severe. The crime class, solitary confinement in tiny dark cells, having a yellow C for crime sewn onto your clothes.
And the head shaving continued.
Yes, that humiliating crown of thieves. But these women, they didn't just take it, they fought back.
Tell us about the flash mob. That sounds intriguing.
It was a subculture within the crime class. They took pleasure in tormenting their captors. There's the famous story of Ellen Scott mooning Holy Willie.
Seriously?
Oh, yes. Apparently, they even managed to debag him once, pull his trousers down. They were incredibly daring. Tunneling out of solitary, climbing walls, running scams, having secret parties.
Even unnatural connections, the records mention.
Yes, forming relationships with each other. And some escaped. Catherine Henry's Jemmy the Rover lived disguised as a male timberkin for a whole year before being caught. Their spirit was just irrepressible.
But there's a terribly sad side to Cascades, too, especially concerning the children born there.
Deeply tragic. The nursery on Liverpool Street was so bad, newspapers called it the Valley of the Shadow of Death. In just 3 months in 1838, over 20 infants died there.
20 in 3 months.
And the government's response? Blame the mothers. Not the appalling conditions, not the lack of sanitation or care. It was pure blame shifting.
And then they started separating the children, like Arabella, from their mothers.
Yes, under the guise of protecting them from the convict stain. The official line was preparing them for useful lives as servants. But really, it was about control, breaking bonds, and ensuring a supply of cheap labor.
What were conditions like at the Queen's Orphan School where they sent them?
Austere. Basic food, basic education, but reports of children suffering terribly from chilblains due to the cold, and just a general lack of warmth and care, not nurturing places.
So back to Agnes. She really struggled against the system in Cascades.
She did. In and out of crime class 12 times in total. For things like insolence, being found outside her assigned area, even representing herself to be free, she just wouldn't submit.
And she had that heartbreaking reunion with Janet.
Yes, at the Liverpool Street nursery. Janet had had a baby boy, William, but the baby died. Agnes, Ludlow, and Janet were all there for his burial in St. David's Cemetery. Unmarked grave, no ceremony, just grief.
Ludlow must have seen so much death working as a nurse there.
She did, witnessing infant after infant dying. And then she herself got punished, caught smuggling things for another prisoner. That landed her a year of solitary hard labor.
A whole year.
Yes. And afterwards, because Cascades was overflowing, she was transferred to the other female factory in Launceston. The system just kept grinding them down.
But eventually, their sentences ended. They were freed. But freedom didn't mean acceptance, did it? That convict stain was hard to escape.
Incredibly hard. There was huge prejudice from the free settlers. Even renaming the island Tasmania was partly an attempt to whitewash the convict past. Charles Darwin visited and made some pretty critical remarks about the former convicts he saw.
But they didn't just fade away.
No way. The emancipist movement emerged. Freed convicts started demanding rights, organizing, gaining political influence. Eventually, they actually outnumbered the free settlers. They fought for their place.
And Agnes McMillan found love.
She did. With William Roberts, another former convict. His back was scarred from the lashings, the cat-o'-nine-tails, but the book says he had a larking in his soul. They met in a place called Oatlands. For Agnes, who'd known such hardship, it seems like it was the first real love and care she'd ever experienced.
That's wonderful to hear. When did they get their freedom?
Their certificates of freedom came through on the same day, May 3rd, 1843. That was the last time Agnes saw her old friend Janet.
So sad they lost touch. What did Agnes and William do?
They moved to the Huon Valley, south of Hobart. Beautiful area. William worked as a pit sawyer, felling the valuable Huon pine trees. Agnes got pregnant. Then, in 1854, like so many others, they caught gold fever.
Off to the Victoria goldfields.
Yes. But even then, their past haunted them. They had to prove they were free, not escaped convicts. And they apparently hid their gold nuggets in their kids' mappies.
Resourceful to the end.
Absolutely. And they were actually in Ballarat during the Eureka Stockade Rebellion in December 1854.
Wow, a major event in Australian history.
Huge. Miners protesting against unfair licenses, clashing with the authorities. Agnes's sons actually witnessed the violence, and women were right there in the thick of it, defying soldiers, nursing the wounded Anastasia Hayes and others stitching the famous Southern Cross flag. That fight for rights resonated, you know?
It must have. How did Agnes's story end?
The book finds her in 1869 living in Lismore, northern New South Wales. A contented matriarch, surrounded by her children and grandchildren. She'd successfully hidden her convict past, like many did. A quiet, peaceful end after such a tumultuous life.
And Ludlow Tedder. How did she fare after freedom?
Ludlow seems to have been very pragmatic. Van Diemen's land had far more men than women, like a 9-to-1 ratio. So she found another husband, William Manly Chambers, though he seems to have disappeared later. She then married again, a John Atterwell, and finally got her certificate of freedom in December 1848. She and Arabella also went to the Victoria Gold Rush around 1852.
Did they strike it rich?
They seem to have done well. They settled in Sandhurst, which is now Bendigo, owned property, became quite prosperous. The book describes 3 generations of her family laughing together. A real success story, emerging from such hardship.
We should also touch on the Irish convicts, shouldn't we? Their experience was slightly different.
Definitely. A huge number of Irish, especially women, were transported during and after the Great Famine, often for incredibly minor thefts, stealing food, basically. Remember that quote.
A man is banished from Scotland for a great crime, from England for a small one, and from Ireland, morally speaking, for no crime at all.
Exactly. It sums it up brutally. Take Bridget Mulligan. Her crime in 1850. Stealing a milk tin, a gown, and a petticoat. She got 10 years, despite having no previous record.
10 years for that.
And the prejudice against Irish Catholics was intense. Lieutenant Governor Denison was openly hostile. They faced an extra layer of discrimination.
But Bridget found a way out.
She did. Like Ludlow, she used marriage, got an early release by marrying John Wilde, who was himself a freed convict but had become a successful businessman. It shows the different routes to freedom women found.
The last convict ships arrived in 1853.
Yes, the Duchess of Northumberland and the St. Vincent were among the last. By then, the tide had turned against transportation. But the impact of those Irish convicts, especially the women, was huge. By 1868, Irish immigrants were 20% of Australia's population. They played a massive role in shaping workers' rights and pushing for democratic reforms. Their own experience of injustice fueled that.
So August 1853, they had the Jubilee, celebrating the official end of transportation. The Anti-Transportation League had won. It really marks the end of an era.
It does, and it leaves us with this incredible legacy. These women, Agnes, Janet, Ludlow, Bridget, and, 25,000 others, they weren't just statistics. They were, as the book says, bold women who wove the rich tapestry for a nation's future.
They became the heart and soul of this unique Australian identity.
Absolutely. Their resilience, their defiance, their ability to build communities and families out of literally nothing, that's the foundation.
So we've followed this incredible journey. From the crushing poverty and harsh justice of 19th century Britain, through the horrors of Newgate and the transport ships, the brutality of the female factories, to finally finding freedom, forging new lives, and literally helping build a nation.
It's quite a story. The resilience is just staggering. These women, dismissed as the scum of Britain, proved everyone wrong. Their survival, their love stories, their communities, they're central to understanding Australia's beginnings.
Right, and it makes you think, doesn't it? That convict stain was something people were deeply ashamed of for generations. Governments tried to hide it, erase the records.
They did. But as we've seen, the very qualities forged in that hardship, the ingenuity, the dark humor, the absolute refusal to give up those, became fundamental parts of the Australian character.
So here's something to ponder for you listening. If a nation's identity is really built on all of its history, the good and the bad, the parts we're proud of and the parts that make us uncomfortable, what does it truly mean to embrace origins like these? These women were heroic in their own way. How does acknowledging that fully change how we think about founding stories, not just in Australia, but anywhere?